morning, good afternoon, good evening. The last week has been dominated by a video that Blessed Mhlanga gave at the UN Human Rights conference that he was invited in Geneva to give a talk. This is an interesting story because it underlines the problem that we have in Zimbabwe. I've said on this platform that Zimbabwe is a failed state. We are a failed state. And I like the title that Mhlanga gave the video. Unity, unite against tyranny. Rise for freedom. Zimbabwe is a failed state, and we have never, 46 years and counting, really experienced our freedom. We've been fighting for our freedom and justice and a meaningful say in the governance of the country ever since the country's independence. So we fought to end white colonial rule and transitioned straight into a dictatorship. And we've been fighting for our rights and freedoms ever since. And so the quotation he gave to go with his own Twitter account is an interesting one. We, the willing, led by the unknowing, have done so much with so little. Now we're able to do anything with nothing. We, the willing, led by the unknowing. I think it is very true. And it is this lack of leadership that has resulted in getting Zimbabwe where it is now. Where we fought for freedom, justice, human dignity during white colonial rule, and then we transitioned into a dictatorship. And by the late 1990s, the nation had risked everything to elect an opposition whose task was to implement the democratic reforms to dismantle the dictatorship. And that in turn has failed to accomplish anything. For those who have not seen the video, I'll just play it.
Protocol that has already been observed. I'm a journalist. I don't understand protocol that much. Today I appear before you wearing clothes that I have worn for 73 days in pre-trial detention. This, ladies and gentlemen, was my uniform as I suffered crimes of journalism. That was my prison number in D class section, which is kept the most dangerous criminals. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what repression looks like in Zimbabwe today. In the past, it was violence on the streets, abductions, and forced disappearances. Now, it's violence committed using the legal system. I call it lawfare. As journalist of 25 years, I've reported on Zimbabwe's democratic regression into a sophisticated authoritarian state. It was never always like this. Growing up, I idolized the president, the late Robert Gabriel Mugabe. My dad was a military veteran. He had fought in the War of Liberation to liberate our country from white colonial rule and was a proud member of the ruling ZANU-PF party. So are some of his brothers today, who were also part of the war. We lived comfortably, as he was a soldier at that time. But then, when I was in high school, he got sick. He needed medication. But our government hospitals were dry. There was no medication. For 6 months, I watched him deteriorate. And when he died, I started asking questions. Like, why was our life such a mess? Dad and my father fought for our country. And did we not have enough mineral resources and taxes to provide for this? Ladies and gentlemen, once you start asking those questions, you cannot unask them. And I could not unsee the corruption of a government that treats public interest journalism as a security threat. So I became a journalist, reporting on stories others dared not to touch. I became the face of unmolested truth and journalism, the face of Heart and Soul TV and broadcasting, where I host a show called Free Talk. We give dissenting voices a platform, tackle corruption, and we actually ultimately broke the government's monopoly in broadcast television using multimedia means. So perhaps it came as no surprise to me why I was deemed a political threat and eventually arrested. In February 25, police came to my office with guns to arrest me, a mere man of pen, paper, and words. Fortunately for me, unfortunately for them, I was in Zambia working on a documentary. So when they could not arrest me, they posted a statement on Elon Musk's X asking the public to help in my arrest. I read this post, voluntarily flew back home, handed myself to the police voluntarily, but dear friends, they still arrested me. This was against advice from my friends, my family, my colleagues, and especially my daughter, Lorraine Ruby Mhlanga, who advised me not to return to Zimbabwe, but instead to lie low in South Africa until the situation cooled down. Like them, I knew what would happen. The state has been very consistent on how it plays its hand. They arrest opponents, punish them through pre-trial detention, and release them months later. You might be acquitted, but you would have been punished.
I'll stop it there. It is tragic. This is a recurring story in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, ever since we gained our independence, we have had two medias. The public media, the government-controlled media, which is the bigger one, which seems to specialize in misinforming the people and propaganda. And then we've got the smaller, the private media, which the authority has always treated as an enemy. And they've been prosecuted ever since our independence. Blessed Mhlanga is not the first journalist to be subjected and abused by the regime. This is a regime that firmly believes that ZANU-PF as the party has the divine right to rule. And to make sure that they maintain that power, they have used and abused state machinery. Institutions like the courts, the police, the election commission, literally all state institutions have been corrupted to the point where there are ZANU-PF departments in all but name, serving to promote the one goal, to keep ZANU-PF in power at all costs. The truth is something that the regime does not want to hear. And this is why journalists have been targeted. Nonetheless, one has got to salute people like Blessed Mhlanga, Jeff Nyarota, and many other journalists who have weathered the state persecution to try to educate the people of Zimbabwe on their rights and their freedoms, and to report on corruption and mismanagement, etc. One of the interviews that he was referring to, over which he was arrested, was when he interviewed a ZANU-PF leader who was himself at one point a member of the Central Committee of ZANU-PF. Here is that interview.
aiwaga mirani kutauri imwe zvinhu zvinoitika hani ndiri kutokutaurira kurauza kuti hatina kupusaka because ndiri kutokutaurira kuti tozviziva takapusaka ndisikakutauriri zvese we'll deal with this situation at the appropriate time, but ndiri kutotaura kuti commander vamunangagwa, right, navachiwenga handidi, right, ngavadissolve policy bureau tikwane isu varizi vechunhu, ngavadissolve cabinet inoti nana kazembe vana soda vanani havambozviutaga pane kupaniwa vane kambamura vanani, why do you hate your comrades? Kune mageneral, kune retired CIO vakawanda, kune retired commissioners of police and other senior officers vakawanda havadiwe.
Maybe the president is looking at capacity and capability.
Bullshit. Vana grade 7 ane capacity and capability. Grade 7, oita busy yokwinzi nhasi aitwa minister of state mangwana provincial minister isiripo. We are not apologetic about it. Chinhu chedu ichi toda kutopinda, ndoda kuti president vanipo zimota varipo chi, ndoda mabodyguards ini.
But you've got your own cars. You've got a hotel at your house that you built in Sanyat. Why do you want all this?
I want to be rewarded as well, not to be used like a political condom all the time. I'm not a political condom. And urikona vana Mahere vaya vana vamwe.
The whole fallout with Blessed Geza, the gentleman that was being interviewed there, is now led to, may his soul rest in peace. He fell out with ZANU-PF leader, Emmerson Mnangagwa, because Emmerson Mnangagwa is now advocating that he should be allowed to stay in power beyond the stated two-term limits. And Blessed Geza was one of the war veterans who stood up and said this is rubbish. But it underlines the problem with ZANU-PF. This is a regime that truly believe that they have the divine right to rule the country. Zimbabwe has never held free, fair, and credible elections, ever since the country's independence in 1980. Those first elections in 1980, in fact, were marred because ZANU-PF, contrary to the agreement of the Lancaster House, that they would withdraw all their freedom fighter operatives, the regime did not do so. Many of their freedom fighters were left in the field and were given the instructions to tell the people that if ZANU-PF does not win the elections, the bush war would continue. And so naturally, of course, the people voted to end the bush war. And as soon as ZANU-PF, Robert Mugabe and company got their feet under the desk, the next thing they did was launch the now infamous Kukura-Wundi. I've said on this platform, and I'll say it again, the primary purpose of the Kukura-Wundi was to force the only other political party that constituted a serious power challenge to ZANU-PF, i.e. PF SAPO, led by the late Dr. Joshua Nkomo, to give up its existence as an independent party. The Kukura-Wundi massacre was to last until 1987, when the SAPO leaders finally signed the Unity Accord, which cleared the way for the imposition of the de facto one-party state that has ruled the country until this day. That is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. The people of Zimbabwe then decided in the late 1990s. The choice was simple. It's either the people did nothing and bear the consequences of the dictatorship, the ZANU-PF dictatorship. By the late 1990s, the economy was already in serious trouble. And the tyrannical oppression, of course, was still there. The other choice was to take up arms and fight the regime, just as the nation had fought against the white colonial rulers. Because there's no doubt that ZANU-PF thugs were not going to give up power. They established a de facto one-party state, and they were not giving it up. The third choice was that people should risk everything to elect an opposition that will then be tasked to implement the democratic reforms necessary to take the country back to what was promised during the War of Liberation. One man, one vote. Freedom and justice for all. The people decided they will go for electing a competent opposition, or rather electing an opposition. And Morgan Tsvangirai and his friends launched MDC in 1999, riding on that promise that they would deliver the democratic changes the nation was dying for. They even called their party the Movement for Democratic Change. The unfortunate reality is ZANU-PF stepped up its tyranny. Here was Morgan Tsvangirai in 2007 when he was beaten up by ZANU-PF government operatives. Chamisa in a similar sorry state. It was SADC behind the scenes who forced ZANU-PF to implement some reforms to ensure that the coming elections in 2008 would be free, fair, and credible. And the 2008 elections, when the results started coming out, it was clear that ZANU-PF was losing those elections. It was at that point that Mnangagwa and his current vice president, Constantino Chiwenga, decided to step in, take over the job of SEC, and went on to recount the votes and whittle down Morgan Tsvangirai's win to justify the runoff that was to follow. Here is an account of what happened in 2008.
I also know that Mugabe conceded defeat in 2008. He found Mbeki and Obasanjo to concede defeat. I hope that Thabo Mbeki and Obasanjo will one day make that public. But one of them, I won't say which one, told me that Mugabe phoned them that Saturday night and said, look, I lost election and I concede defeat. And I know that Mugabe stuck to his guns. I was prepared to go. His wife was since bags packed to go somewhere on the following day when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga approached him and said, you stay where you are. And then they contrived the runoff, sadly with the help of South Africa. And runoff took place, very violent. 360 people were killed. The South African, I came here as part of a delegation to Cape Town to see members of the ANC. I don't want to mention names, they're my friends. I saw them, and through them, a cabinet committee subcommittee of South African cabinet was set up on the Zimbabwe issue. It was on the basis of that cabinet committee that South Africa did not recognize the runoff. And indeed, it was the basis of that committee that Thabo sent the generals to South Africa, to Zimbabwe. I met them, and I was one of the few to have read the report, because I was flying to Joburg in the company of General Romano, who was a friend. He passed away. No? That's why, yeah. And I also took people who had lost their hands in the violence to the South African embassy in Harare. And Romano broke down in tears. How can a liberation movement treat these people like that? He was a broken man. So there's no doubt at all here in South Africa as to the brutality of the regime in Harare. So it amazes me, it angers me, in fact, when I hear the nonsense coming out of people like Mbalula's mouth. They know it.
It is a tragedy that we had the liberation heroes who turned out to be mercenaries, because that is exactly what happened in Zimbabwe. The ZANU-PF, as much as many of those who had been involved in the liberation war genuinely believed in freedom, justice, and independence for all. Unfortunately, the leadership hijacked the revolution for their own selfish ends and turned Zimbabwe into a dictatorship. Credit where credit is due, SADC refused to accept the results of the 2008 Operation Mafotera Papi electoral coup. And that forced ZANU-PF to accept the formation of the Government of National Unity. 2008 to 2013. The tragedy for Zimbabwe is this was the nation's second chance, second bite at the cherry. If the opposition leaders, Morgan Tsvangirai and company, had implemented the democratic reforms, Zimbabwe would be in a totally different place. Unfortunately, Morgan Tsvangirai and company failed to implement even one token reform. Robert Mugabe bribed them with the trappings of high office, the E-class Mercedes-Benz limos for all the deputy ministers, the ministers, the two prime ministers, and Prime Minister Tsvangirai himself. And for Prime Minister Tsvangirai, Mugabe bought him a $4 million house. And they were all given, all elected MDC officials were all given very generous salaries and allowances and so forth. And with their snouts in the feeding trough, they forgot about the reforms completely. Indeed, only recently, information has started to come out showing that the opposition leaders got a lot more than just the trappings of high office that most of us believed. Some of them got farms. Here is a recent story revealing what some of these opposition leaders got.
Bhazi rikafira Mhlanga, munhu asina kwaari kuenda mubhazi mumu anofara kuti ndo patopumba pake nditori nevamwe vangu pana. Munhu anorwadziwa nekurara Mhlanga, munhu ane kumba.
taibhadana kumba kwangu
but amana kumba kugombezera rangu reria mwana so but munhu asina imba hatete kurara musango. So opposition inomake sure kuti vanhu vaya vawane minda. But may he so rest in peace vatsvangirai prazi ravo vanga vainaro chamisa anaro
ane family
kana azoramba ndoenda newe
riri kupi
ane famu
ribi
I know madrese munhu anetsa kuti focha but anaro chakudza off camera.
Okay,
ane mine
ane
makaseo.
Yeah,
Yes, biti ane prazi. Hauna kumboona here picture yabiti achitenga mombe kuna Temba Mliswa dzekuisa kuprazi. One of the biggest beef producers in the Matabeleland region, the Washman Ngwe.
Okay,
Yes, ane prazi. Ana utenga beneficiary pa land reform. But what they did is to discourage their people from acquiring my farms because vaiza kuti munhu akaona something chapiwa nehurumende haachapikisa.
Are you for real, Mr. Kanishai?
Nomubvunza Washman Ngwe kuti haasi kuita beef here, producer beef here paprasi. Tonyaenda upo chingono gore rere. Handiti kuti stand ya upo chingono standard ine painogumira. But vakatotaura nehurumende nemasabhuku ika-extend kwa because aita god.
That has been the tragedy of Zimbabwe. We have elected leaders, first of all, ZANU-PF, in positions of power and authority. They fought in the liberation war, and we thought they were going to deliver freedom, justice for all. They turned out to be mercenaries. We then elected the opposition and risked livelihoods, limbs, and even human lives to elect them. But as soon as they got in power, they too became corrupt. And they started looking at their own selfish gains and forgot about the ordinary people. I would like to conclude this discussion tonight by going back to the same platform that Blessed Mhlanga stood on when he gave his speech and talked about the problems of Zimbabwe. This time it was 2023, and the speaker was opposition leader Mahere. Let's just hear what she has to say.
That change is possible. Courage doesn't mean that you're not afraid. It means that you act in spite of your fear because you believe in a greater cause. And I choose courage and choose hope. This August, Zimbabweans go to the ballot box with one simple mission: to win Zimbabwe for change, to install ethical, competent leaders who believe in dignity, prosperity, and freedom for everyone. The world must insist on this election being free, fair, and credible. The will of the people has to prevail. It's difficult, but we must emancipate the jewel of Africa from the imprisonment of its current dictatorship. Hope and action are the sustenance of those who change the world. Thank you.
What is interesting there is that she had participated in the 2018 elections. The European Union and all respectable election observers had condemned those elections as flawed. And they emphasized the need to implement the democratic reforms to make sure that elections are free, fair, and credible. Indeed, the opposition, the MDC, they had known that elections in Zimbabwe are rigged. And this is a quotation from David Coulthard's book, which I've often referred to and is very relevant. In this quotation, David Coulthard admits that the election process in 2013 was so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was to withdraw. But in the full quotation going across your screen there, he explains why the opposition never withdrew from these flawed elections. Greed. Father Mahere was standing at the UN human rights platform. I think many of the people who had invited her there expected her to accept the reality that without reforms, elections in Zimbabwe will never be free, fair, and credible. More significantly, to accept the reality that if you participate in those flawed elections, in this case here out of greed, you only give the regime legitimacy, which David Coulthard admitted in that quotation. So here she is, she participated in 2018. The elections were rigged. And by participating, she gave ZANU-PF legitimacy. And you would think by now she would have learned, but no. She went to the UN, was given this opportunity to speak at an international stage on the need for free, fair, and credible elections. And what she said to those people was that, yes, we accept that ZANU-PF rigs the elections, but we are going to participate. And she did participate. And we know that her president, she was then the spokesperson of CCC. Her then president, Nelson Chamisa of CCC, was the one who was telling the people that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. He even evoked the name of God, that CCC was going to win those elections.
Makorokoto Zimbabwe, nokuti hakuna munhu anomira kana denga raronga plan. Denga raronga plan, denga harifo iri. Plan ya Mwari haifo iri. Ini ndatanga kugadzira cabinet. There is no way we are not going to form a new cabinet. There is no way we are not going to have a celebration. There is no way we are not going to have an inauguration. Let's start preparing for our inauguration. Let's start preparing for our celebration.
The truth of the matter was that Chamisa was lying. He had not plugged the vote-rigging loopholes. He was participating in these flawed elections out of greed. He knew that participating will give ZANU-PF legitimacy. This is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. We keep going round and round in circles. We started with ZANU-PF. The people, the ordinary people, played their part during the Liberation War in supporting the struggle for independence, only for ZANU-PF to betray them. And by the late 1990s, the people decided, okay, we are going to risk our livelihoods, limbs, and many even lost their lives to elect the opposition on the understanding that they would implement the democratic reforms to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. Instead, the opposition got corrupted and they forgot about the reforms. What we are facing right now in Zimbabwe is a situation where we are just going round and round in circles. The opposition, like it or not, they will never implement any meaningful democratic reforms. And yet they will also keep on participating in these flawed elections for their share of the spoils of power. So I would like to finish by referring back to Blessed Mhlanga's quotation. We, the willing, led by the unknowing, have done so much with so little. Now we are able to do anything with nothing. I think he was being very optimistic there. At the present moment, we, the ordinary people, are at a loss. First, we trusted ZANU-PF leaders. They were our Liberation War heroes to deliver freedom, justice, and human dignity for all. They sold out. Then we trusted the opposition. They've all but become ZANU-PF Team B in all but name, playing for Team A to win and for Team A to have legitimacy. ZANU-PF is quite content with the present arrangement. They know that the opposition will never challenge them for power. And they are quite content with the present arrangement. The tragedy, of course, is that the people themselves have not realized, have not woken up to the reality that we have an opposition that is ZANU-PF Team B in all but name. Here is Emmerson Mnangagwa boasting about Zimbabwe's opposition.
I'm happy kuti in Zimbabwe hakuna friction between the ruling party and the opposition party. But it is critically important that we must have an opposition which must check on the ruling party. So members of the opposition, make sure you deal with the ruling party. Don't make them sit. Make sure you make them busy, the opposition. Somebody get up. Nyanga bakadini, rambai mchingo criticize, kuseni masikati criticize. That way, basi watu warambi vari power. Nokuti vanenge vachidiscover mistakes avo vachicorrect. Ivi muchingorova, nokuti mukasivarova vanorelaxa, mozotora power. So my advice to opposition, please be serious in opposition. Nokuti murambe muri mu opposition.
At the present moment, Zimbabwe is going through a difficult, another phase, if you want, dragging us deeper and deeper into the abyss. Mnangagwa is pushing through an amendment to allow himself to stay in power beyond the two-term limits. The opposition that participated in 2023 has become totally useless. They have imploded soon after the 2023 elections, in fact, with some of them being recalled and forming factions. And it is widely believed that most of those CCC elected officials will support this so-called Constitution Amendment number 3, seeking to give Mnangagwa extended powers, extend his rule in stay in office. And the people are helpless. They don't know what to do. And there's really very little they can do to change the situation. If there was going to be any change at all, it should have been that we should not have participated in those flawed elections in the first place. Because by participating, we gave ZANU-PF legitimacy. And now we are paying for it. To come back to Mnangagwa and his hatred of the media. Here is what he said regarding the media.
Under my leadership, the media will continue to be our cornerstone for promoting unity, peace, social cohesion, harmony, and the love for our country. Anything besides this, Chibakera Mziso.
In many ways, what Blessed Mhlanga is experiencing now is the violence that Mnangagwa was threatening. This is the reality, where those who dare speak the truth are being brutally silenced. And it is interesting to note that one of the CCC senators has since been talking about raising a motion in the Senate to have Blessed Mhlanga arrested or charged for being unpatriotic. This is where the country has gone. This is where we have reached. Where the opposition and ZANU-PF are really one and the same thing. And we, the people, don't know where to go. The majority of the ordinary people still have faith in the opposition for no better reason than that they've got a binary mentality. They have rejected ZANU-PF, so they've got to accept the opposition. Try to explain to them that the opposition is sold out has been a challenge in its own right. The last 3 years, for instance, has been an endless battle with some of the ordinary Zimbabweans out there. They cannot accept that Chamisa lied when he said he had plugged the vote-rigging loopholes. And yet he had lied. Why that should become a big issue, biggest belief? Look at the statement. And yet some people still don't want to admit it. This is the reality in Zimbabwe. They cannot let go of the opposition because they feel they've got a choice between ZANU-PF and the opposition, CCC. And since CCC have not been in power and have not subjected them to the same abuse as ZANU-PF has done, they must be good. This is what I call the personality cult mentality. And it is that has kept us, the nation, stuck where we are now. These people cannot accept that Chamisa has let them down. They cannot accept it. Even with the evidence that in 26 years, including the 5 years in the GNU, the opposition have failed to implement even one token reform. Still, they cannot accept it. That is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. Thank you very much, those who were able to join us. I hope you'll be able to do it again tomorrow. It will be on the same platform. And if you want to join, please use the link that we've provided for you to join. And we'll show it again tomorrow if you want to join us. And thank you very much to the administrator there for helping produce this video. Good night.